There are no shortage of explanations as to why traditional print media newspapers are going out of business. I want to give you mine. And that is, I believe that one of the reasons why people subscribed to newspapers for years and years and years was because included with the newspaper was something called a TV guide. Now, if you're from a certain generation, you know what a TV guide was. And that is, it would let you know exactly when the programs that you loved, the day and hour that they would be broadcast on. One of the shows that I grew up with, that my parents would always mark very clearly into the TV guide, was a show that won 34 Emmy nominations throughout the 1970s. No. Oh, I didn't realize that this was a question and answer period. Okay. All in the Family, I have one. I have MASH, another. Taxi. And on this day of February the 14th, I want to suggest to you that Louis De Palma, who was played by Danny DeVito, the ornery, crotchety, angry, but surprisingly philosophic and a great Stoic philosopher in his own right, offered this definition of love. He said, imploring to Zena, played by his then wife, Rhea Perlman, imploring her to stay his girlfriend. He said, I'm going to tell you what love is. He says, just ask. She doesn't ask him. He says, well, I'm going to tell you anyway. He says that the meaning, the definition of love is the end of happiness. And he says, why is it the end of happiness? He said, because before I met you, I could sit in front of the TV set and watch the Mets alone. Before I met you, I'd be happy just to lock my door at the end of the day and go to sleep by myself. And now, in order for me to be happy, I put the Mets on, but Zena has to be there. And now, after I met you, when I lock my door at night, I want you to be on the other side with me. Being in love means that it's the end of my happiness because I can't live without you. Valentine's Day, which is today, of course, has its origins in ancient Rome. It was known as Lupercalia. Can't even say it. Lupercalia, which emerged as a weird kind of fertility ritual, and then with time became a matchmaking event in the ancient Roman Empire amongst the ancient Normans. They had something called Galatine, which also was a very similar pagan celebration of fertility, which then became a celebration of matchmaking. The word Valentine comes from two different Christians who were murdered by the Roman Empire in their persecution against early Christians in the 3rd century. They were both named Valentine, and it appears to be that, and only that actual history can make happen, that the mixing and blending of the Norman invasion into the Roman Empire, of Galatine, and then, of course, the ancient Roman, the pagan celebration of Lupercalia, and then the Christian church canonizing, beatifying Valentine, Saint Valentine. They made this holiday called Valentine's Day. The truth is, long before there was Galatine and Lupercalia and the murder of the two Valentines who became Saint Valentines, love has been the most vexing and important question in human life. And far be it, of course, for Judaism not to have something to say about love. And so this being Shabbat and being Valentine's Day, it seemed to me, a very, very ripe opportunity to share a little bit of what Judaism thinks about love. A warning before I start. Anytime someone says that this is what Judaism thinks, turn your head the other way. A tradition that is 3,500 years old certainly has more than one opinion about any given thing. And a tradition that is 3,500 years old certainly probably has a number of different opinions that invariably at some point probably contradict each other. That having been said, I'm going to tell you what Judaism thinks about love. The Torah has a warning about love. And if you read the Torah carefully, you will see the warnings jump off the page. The idea of love as an emotion is something that the Torah and Judaism has a great degree of weariness about. Look no further than the story of Jacob and Laban, Jacob and Laban, his father-in-law, who took him when he was on the run, put his arm around his future son-in-law and said, "Don't worry, my son, we love you here, only for this man in the end to betray him and steal from him and then threaten grave bodily harm." Look a little bit further then to the story of Joseph and his brothers. The very people who are supposed to love him are the people who betray him in the most primal of ways. They plan to murder him, and then short of murdering him, they abandon him and then sell him off to the flesh slave trades of Egypt, thinking that he would be forever in exile and removed. And in doing so, they literally tore the hearts out of their father. And in the end, when Joseph is reunited with his brothers, Joseph no longer the slave, but now the viceroy over the entire Egyptian empire, Joseph, in his message to his brothers, if I can sum it up in simple language, he says to them, "Don't love me so much." What does he mean? People speak of love, and you don't act lovingly. People feel love, but they don't give love. And so the Torah, by looking at the story of human emotion and love in the stories of Genesis and even beyond the book of Genesis, we find time and time again the warnings about the human emotion of love. And that is, emotions are unreliable and risky and dangerous things. People feel one thing at one time, and then they feel another thing at another time. When you're angry, you can never imagine then in the moment of your piping hot anger, you cannot imagine that you won't be angry again at some point. In other words, that the anger will pass. And when you're in love, the flash-like, fiery, burning love, in that moment, you can't imagine feeling anything but that kind of love. And yet we know that anger comes and anger goes. And the hot, fiery, burning, flashing love comes and it goes. And so the Torah is written large with a warning about emotions, because human emotions are scary things to build a life on. Don't build your life on emotions, the Torah is telling you. Build it on something else. And so if you don't build your life on emotion, what then should you build your life on? Now, it occurred to me when I opened up the Torah portion for this week, the very opening words of the Torah portion, and when you read this Torah portion, and you should actually, it is a stringing together of many, many laws. It follows, in fact, the name of the Torah portion itself, it's called Mishpatim, which means laws. It is one of the great collections of ancient Near Eastern laws to be found in the entire human record. You could add to that the Stele of Hammurabi and the great code of Anusha and whatnot from ancient Mesopotamia. It is a great code of human law that we read this morning. And yet the opening words are the story of the Hebrew slave, a man who, because of the burden of great debts, is then put into some kind of servitude to work off his debt. Then at the end of the 6 years, which is the maximum that someone could be in servitude for their debts, he's set free. The Torah then provides the following ritual. If he doesn't want to go, if he wants to remain basically a servant for the rest of his life, there's a ceremony that he goes through. And he says the following thing. He comes to his owner, to his master, and says, Ahavti et Adoni ve'et ishti ve'et banai. I loved my master and I love my wife, and I love my children. Presumably the wife and children that were provided to him by the master. The master gave him a wife, and then he sired children with this person. And you would think, how beautiful a reflection. That this man doesn't want to leave behind the person who gave him room and board. And then the man also loves his wife and the children that he had while in the care of this very generous person who put him up to work out his debts. But there was a rabbi in the 15th century from the 1400s. His name was Ovadia. He was from the Italian city of Bertinoro. He's known today in the Jewish world simply as the Bartenura. There's actually Israeli wine named after him as well. Right, that's where you know the word from. It comes from the Bartenura. The Bartenura, this rabbi, Italian rabbi, actually Bertinoro is right outside of Florence. Right outside of Florence. The Bartenura looks at this phrase, and what does he say? Don't be so impressed with this man. Because how does he begin his declaration that he doesn't want to be set free? He opens up by saying, I loved Ahavti et Adoni, I loved my master. And then I loved my wife. And then I loved my children. The Bartenura says, why does he start off by saying that he loved his master first? Because the master provided the food and the clothing and the shelter for him and the children and the wife. In the end, the Bartenura says, he didn't really love his wife or his children nearly as much as the person who was feeding and clothing him. If we're not to build our life on emotion, what then should you build your life on? This idea is actually sharpened by another question, and that is, how can you command people to love? How do you command people to love? The Torah is filled with these ideas. It says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," that you should love your neighbor as yourself. V'ahavta metager, you should love the stranger, which is actually mentioned 36 times in the biblical record. It is the most mentioned expression in the entire Torah. V'ahavta metager, you should love the stranger, which then asks the question, how do you command an emotion if emotions aren't meant to be trusted? And it seems to me that what Judaism and the Torah is arguing about love is that love for us is not a feeling. It is an enacted feeling. Love is an enacted emotion. A love worth mentioning and discussing and weighing and valuing is a love that is built upon actions and not declarations of feelings. Love your neighbor as yourself. Doesn't simply say be nice or love your neighbor. Act lovingly to them the way that you act lovingly to yourself. V'ahavtem et hager, you should love the stranger. In other words, be compassionate and giving and charitable to them. If you say that you love somebody, be loving to them. I cannot begin to tell you the number of times I have couples in my office, and each one more than the other is declaring how loving and good they are. And I invariably end up saying to each of them, if you want to know if you're good and loving and caring, don't ask yourself. Ask your spouse. Ask the people around you. You want to know if you're a good, loving friend? Ask your friends. If you're a loving and caring spouse, ask your spouse. But there's a danger in that, you know. You might hear the answer you don't want to hear, which on some level is probably the thing that you need to hear. The answer fundamentally in our question about the idea of love, about emotion and acting lovingly, is seen in this small question by a medieval rabbi. He says the following. He goes, why is it that in the Shema we are told that you should, in the text of the Shema it says, Vayu hadvarim ha'ileh, and these words which I command to you should be al levavecha, on your heart. The rabbi goes on to say, because often when the Torah speaks about the heart, it says it should be bilvavecha, inside of your heart, or binafshecha, inside of your soul. Why then in this command of the Shema does it say that it should be these words on your heart? And centuries later, another rabbi comes to answer the question. His name is Menachem Mendel Morgenstern. He lived in the 19th century in Poland. And he says the reason why the Torah says that these words should be al levavecha, on your heart. He says, because most of the time our hearts are closed. So let it be that the words will sit on top of our hearts. And then, when our hearts are ready to open, the words will come in. Which is to say, live your life acting loving. And then in time, the effect of acting loving will fill your heart with love. That's how you should live your life. Shabbat Shalom. And happy Valentine's Day.